you can hear me.
You want me to introduce you, Eliana?
So I will start.
No.
And afterwards, I will try to connect while Eliana is talking with another device. First of all, again, sorry for this technical problem. I would like to thank Sarita and for the introduction that she probably did about me and Eliana, and Warren for the invitation to this edition of the Saas-Fee. Yes, I'm here talking to Eliana. Eliana says that he can introduce me, that Warren can introduce me. That will be really helpful, Warren. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Great. Welcome to the Saas-Fee Summer Institute of Art. Very excited for all of you to be online with us today. The talk will concern our session between Florencia Portocarrero and Eliana Otta Vildosa, I hope that's correct, will concern fertilizing mourning from representation to thinking with. And more than 60% of the Peruvian territory is part of the Amazon, locally known as Selva. This vast economically and politically neglected region is currently the center of some of the most important debates in terms of sustainability and planetary biopolitics, as well as a crucial site for the struggle for the rights of indigenous communities and the preservation of their ancestral knowledge. Despite the high degree of social conflict experienced in the Amazon area due to illegal mining, wood felling, drug trafficking, and internal colonial processes of land appropriation by the state, over the last 15 years, its multiple and heterogeneous artistic production has received increasing attention at a national and international level, many thanks to the work of artists, academics, curators who have devoted themselves to research, promotion, dissemination of what is currently considered one of the most solid scenes in Peru. Even though all these efforts have been essential to make visible the importance of Amazonian cultural production, they have mainly operated in the representational realm, rarely addressing the primitive accumulation processes that traverse the region and its inhabitants. In conversation with curator Florencia Portocarrero in Fertilizing Mourning from Representation to Thinking With, artist Eliana Otta will introduce her latest project, which inspired by Yana Alpa, a technique that was devised thousands of years ago by Amazonian communities to guarantee soil regeneration, proposes us to learn from people who have already survived many endings of their worlds and therefore may be better equipped for living in a damaged planet. Eliana Otta is an artist with a master's in cultural studies and currently candidate at a PhD in practice program at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna, and her project Lost Shared approaches to collective mourning towards effective and transformative politics. The project investigates the way in which art can enable the collectivization of mourning, creating dialogues between theory and effective labor through collective experiences that connect emotions, critical thinking, body, and space. She coordinated the curatorial team at Lugar de la Memoria, Museum of Memory in Peru, and has taught at the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Peru and co-founded the artist-run space Bisagra. Florence Portocarrero writes, lectures, teaches, organizes both exhibitions and public programs. Her research interests are focused on how to rewrite art history from a feminist perspective, regimes of subjectivization in the context of neoliberal globalization, and the questioning of hegemonic forms of knowledge. Between 2008 and 2010, she completed her master's degree in theoretical studies and psychoanalysis at the Pontifical Catholic University in Peru, Later, from 2012, 2013, she participated in the curatorial program at the Apple Art Center in Amsterdam. And in 2015, she completed a second master's degree in contemporary art at Goldsmiths. She has participated in several international conferences, and her writings on art and culture appear regularly in specialized magazines such as Atlantica Journal, Artishock, Terremoto. In 2017, 2018, Portocarrero received the Curating Connection Scholarship awarded by the DAD Artists in Berlin program and the KfW Stiftung. In Lima, she has worked as a program curator at Proyecto Amir and was a curatorial advisor of the Museo de Arte de Lima, Mali Contemporary Art Acquisitions Committee, and is a member of Bisagra, one of the few art collectives in the city. Thank you very much.
So Florencia is on 2 devices and she is also muted, so we can't hear her. Can you unmute yourself, Florencia?
Yeah, I'm here now. I'm sorry for this chaotic introduction. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Eliana, I was supposed to share the screen with the PowerPoint we have worked on, but now Eliana is gonna do it because of course something like really weird happened to my computer. So, well, thanks Warren again for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here in conversation with Eliana. Eliana and I have been partners in crime for a long time. In 2014, and together with curator Miguel Lopez, artists Joshua Aramburu, Juan Diego Tobalina, and Andrés Pereira Paz, we founded Bisagra, an independent art space that through the years, and mainly due to its member diaspora, has become now an art collective. And our last endeavor is an educational program called Programa de Destinos y Presagios Compartidos, which is mainly focused on Peruvian artists with a kind of Latin American scope. And well, it constitutes a unique initiative in the context of Lima and in Peru in general, you know, a city in which specialization programs in contemporary art are non-existent, and in which artists who have degrees and access, to international platforms such as residencies, PhDs, master degrees are a minority. And I have to say also that the Saas-Fee has been a great inspiration or an important inspiration or reference for this like first edition of the Programa de Destinos y Presagios Compartidos. Our talk today is called Fertilizing Morning, from Representation to Thinking With. And it's the first time Eliana and I join forces to publicly deliberate about a subject that is urgent for us, more taking into consideration that we are both, let's say, cultural agents, Eliana an artist and me a curator, you know, working, you know, in relation to subjects that are related to a country as Peru, which is culturally and epistemologically very diverse, no? And I think that one of the lines that will go through the talk is the cognitive exclusion, oppression, and discrimination that global capitalism generates as a cultural or even civilizational paradigm in a country as Peru, no? One of the main theses is of this talk, I think, is that the recognition of such diversity of knowledge must be at the core of any global resistance against capitalism and the formulation of new forms of sociability, as well as a question of how these processes can be translated into the art world. Here we can see like the first image of the PowerPoint. This is a map of like the Amazon region. as you will see, more than 60% of the Peruvian territory is part of the Amazon. Locally, the Amazon is known as La Selva, which will roughly translate as the jungle. And this is a vast and politically and economically neglected region. Is currently the center of some of the most important debates in terms of sustainability and planetary biopolitics, as well as a crucial site for the struggles for the rights of diverse indigenous communities and the preservation of their ways of life and ancestral knowledge. According to the latest national census, I refer to the latest Peruvian national census, around 25% of Peruvians identify themselves as indigenous and are grouped in 55 communities, 51 of which are to be found in the Amazon. Even though there's a common agreement about the important role these communities and their close relationship to the rainforest play in the protection of the world's biodiversity, it is little what we really know about their specific practices that, as Stefano Varese would say, an author that Eliana introduced me recently, make the selva or the Amazon an anthropogenic phenomenon in which the production, and here I'm quoting Varese, production and constantly expanding reproduction of life results from millennia of coexistence of all the relatives that inhabit the world, including, of course, humans. Moreover, there's also a lack of awareness about the daily struggles of these communities and the tense relation that they hold with the modern nation states in which they are inscribed. Indeed, for the 9 Latin American countries that, let's say, share the Amazon, Brazil has around 64% of the Amazon. You know, it's the country that almost has all the region. Peru, 9.7%, Bolivia and Suriname, 7%, Colombia, 6%, Venezuela, like 6% as well, Guyana, 2%, Ecuador, 1.5%, and the French Guiana, I think like 0.8%, you know. But for all these countries, you know, it represents an strategic territory which not only possesses natural wealth and biodiversity, but also vast areas that capital considers unproductive and therefore socially vacant. The fact that indigenous communities frequently inhabit these areas of dense natural resources and consider them as alive and sacred transform them in obstacles to the expansion of the capitalist system and therefore enemies of the development and nation well-being. The Amerindians, or indigenous Americans, are part of the gigantic minority of people that were never modern because they never had a nature and therefore never lost it, nor did they need to free themselves from it. In fact, Amerindian perspective being is the term that Brazilian anthropologist Eduardo Viveiro de Castro has coined to designate a very much widespread notion in indigenous America, according to which each existing species sees itself as human, specifically and culturally. I won't delve in the Amerindian perspectivism, but this is the belief that is at the core of the famous cosmopolitics. The reduction of the Amerindian animistic worldviews to naive cultural beliefs, or even to an archaic form of irrationality that should be overcome in the name of progress and national unity, has been an essential tool for imposing the extractivist economy. From this perspective, that of course elevates modern science to the unique criteria of truth, the sacrifice of these worldviews is required for the progress and common good of a large part of the national populations. On the other hand, stripped from their intellectual tradition and symbolic universe, as a result of this kind of operations, the indigenous communities are condemned to become an illiterate and semi-nomadic peasant subculture, confronting structural situations of violence. Peruvian anthropologist Marisol de la Cadena has called this war against world-making practices that ignore the separation of entities into nature and culture, and the resistance as well to that war, as the anthroponocene, According to De La Cadena, in America, this persecution started in the 17th century with the extirpation of idolatries by the Christian clerics and has been secularized by modern politics in the name of progress. What is important to highlight in any case is that this epistemicide is the other side of a genocide that is taking place since the colonial invasion. In Sacred Soil, Biochar and the Regeneration of Earth, anthropologist Frederick Apfel-Marglin establishes a parallel between the common land enclosures that took place in Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries, and which play a crucial role in both the birth of capitalism and the concept of nature as totally devoid of consciousness and volition, and the land expropriations that are taking place today in the South American Amazon. For Amerindians, the tropical rainforest is a common asset. No, it's like widely known that they call the forest the market. No, it's a place where they go, in search of medicinal plants, food, fruits, or even to, be in contact with the spirits. Or to recruit themselves, Latin American governments committed to neoliberal globalization model under the rhetoric or promise of development are handing over most of these ancestral common lands, not including indigenous people in this, let's say, development, and leaving the forest highly contaminated, making survival almost impossible for them. Eliana, I don't know if you could please go to the following, yes, exactly. So the following image. To illustrate the violent and criminal nature of these contemporary enclosures.
What's going
on? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. It is worth remembering the Baguazo, a violent confrontation between the police forces and a large group of Awajún Wampis Peruvian citizens.
Yeah, where are you talking about now? In the kitchen or in our little area? In the middle of our bedroom.
Warren, sorry, but we can hear you. This was a confrontation, as I was saying, between a large group of Awajún Wampis, which are like two indigenous communities, and the government, during the government, of the former President Alan Garcia. Everything started when, in an illegal act, the Garcia government promulgated hundreds of legislative decrees in order to implement the free trade agreement with the US, opening the doors of the Amazon to foreign capital. Most of these laws were specially conceived to grant the territory to all exploration without respecting the Convention number 169 of the Indigenous and Tribal People, subscribed by many countries for the International Labour Organization, which requires governments to consult the inhabitants of the territory the territories that corporations may approach for exploitation and exploration. After 2 months of protest and state indolence, the Awajún Wampis took control of the highway at a place called La Curva del Diablo. And instead of trying to negotiate, Garcia ordered the police and the military forces to repress the protest. According to official accounts, the clash produced more than 30 deaths between the police and the Awajún Wampis. However, indigenous people affirmed that the police killed hundreds of indigenous people and threw the bodies to the river. This is something that maybe we can speak later with Eliana, but I think this was the first time our generation saw this kind of indigenous uprising. The civil society, the NGOs and international organisms immediately and massively reacted supporting the native communities. As a result, on June 19, against the will of the president, the Congress cancelled the decrees. However, this didn't prevent the criminalization and persecution of several indigenous leaders, which were accused of murder. Believe it or not, it was only on November of last year, 12 years after the event, that these leaders were absolved by the court. If you want to know more about what happened in Bagua, I really recommend you to watch When Two Worlds Collide. which is a really serious and good documentary that can be found in Netflix, and was directed by Heidi Brandenburg and Matthew Orsel. We could say that today, in 2022, things are slightly different. The indigenous ancestral struggles for land have been reinforced, hand in hand with peasant movements, while new forms of mobilization and citizen participation focused on the defense of natural resources, biodiversity, and the environment have emerged. Although indigenous cosmogonies that relate or escape or exceed the modern genealogy are frequently represented as ancestral, pure, and immutable. Let's say that the spread consciousness about ecological disaster has given rise to a renewed interest on it as a tool for both destabilizing Western thought and imagine a post-capitalistic future. Indigenous communities around the world are aware of this, and with a clear political intention, have been adapting or translating their cosmogonies, vocabularies, and existential projects to the Western environmental rhetoric. As Viveiros de Castro have stated in other places, their aim is to make the civilization that considers to have invented politics understand that politics are only a department of cosmopolitics. However, this, let's say, renewed global awareness by no means has implied an improvement on indigenous people living conditions. And the pandemic, it's a good example of this, mainly to the condition of extreme poverty and the, let's say, lack of access to essential health services. The indigenous communities in Peru, but also like in the Amazon, were the most vulnerable to the pandemic, to the virus, and they will be, the most vulnerable to any health emergency that could come in the future. In Peru, official accounts say that more than 70% of the native population was infected with COVID. As in every place, the most affected were the elderly, who for many communities played the role of leaders, but also like repositories of ancestral knowledge. Therefore, many have described the pandemic as a genocide through state negligence or incompetence, but also I think we could like reframe it as a case of necropolitics, of letting die the, let's say, more vulnerable and non-productive part of society. While reading and researching for this talk, I found a recent interview to Viveiros de Castro in an Argentinian newspaper, which I found very interesting and illuminating. Viveiros de Castro affirmed we were experiencing through our own action what the Indian communities have experienced since the conquest. We will not see that, like them, and here I'm quoting Viveiros de Castro, the 90% disease of our population, but the effects will be deep and lasting. He also stressed that the pandemic has proved that we are trapped in an inescapable web of reciprocity, that the boundaries of our individuality are porous, that our own health depends on the health of all, and that the recognition of this physiological interdependence challenges the idea of Western individualism reinforced by the neoliberal economy, highlighting the urgency of creating communities based on caring of each other and, of course, of nature. Anyway, can we go to the following image, Eliana, please? Despite of the high degree of social conflict experienced in the Amazon over, let's say, the last 20 or 15 years, its multiple and heterogeneous artistic production has received increasing attention at a national and international level, mainly thanks to the really committed and groundwork done by artists, indigenous and not indigenous, academics and curators who have devoted themselves to the research, promotion, and dissemination of what is currently considered one of the most solid artistic scenes in Peru. In recent years, multiple investigations and publications have been produced around artistic practices of the Peruvian Amazon in the 20th and 21st century, focusing in very diverse topics such as myths and worldviews, the rubber era, visionary art, and the rescue of popular urban art. I think the practices surrounding myths and cosmogonies deserve special attention, since many indigenous artists are working around these subjects, translating, their cosmogonies towards an artistic sphere, and therefore to a larger public outside their communities. And here you can see a painting, of Rember Yawarkani, who is a Witoto artist, and in some way condenses the myth of the creation of the world in his community, And this is just one example. There are also artists like Lastenia Canayo, Elena Valera, Ronald Pinedo, anyway, like a long list of indigenous and Peruvian artists, let's say, that are working around myths. It's a very interesting topic. But in any case, it's not surprising that in this context, the two latest and most visible Peruvian national representations have revolved in some way around the Amazon. I don't know if, Eliana, if we can go to the next image. This is the case of Amazonias. This is the entrance to the show. It was one of the most ambitious show about the Amazon, and was created by Sharon Lerner and Gretel Landolt, and opened in Matadero, Madrid, in the context of Arco, the Art Fair, 2019, to which Peru was the invited country. Now Arco is operating in a very interesting way, because each year they invite a Latin American country to be like the guest country. So that country takes not only the art fair, but cultural institutions around the city. Amazonias, can we go to the following image, Eliana, please? And the following one as well. Amazonias brought together works by 46 Latin American authors, mainly from the Mali collection. The Mali collection is el Museo de Arte de Lima. Some of these artists operate in the so-called international contemporary art circuit, while others are indigenous creators with more or less international exposure, depending on the case. As a result, the show included a wide variety of materials and supports: paintings, sculptures, photographs, installation, videos, as well as traditional pieces associated to the Amazon region, such as ceramics or Shipibo Conibo textiles, as you can see in this image. In other place, Sharon Lerner, who was the contemporary art curator of the museum and is now the director, has referred to Amazonias as an extension of the museum project. In fact, in recent years, the museum has introduced new acquisition policies for contemporary art. As Warren said in the introduction, I was part of the acquisition committee, and was also part of the conceptualization of some of these politics, which have allowed to break down the boundaries that have traditionally separated folk art, from fine arts. In that sense, new acquisition projects around the cultural visual production in the Amazonian region have become a space for critical reflection on the limits of aesthetic categories and disciplinary divisions that still rule in the local artistic institutional system, and basically respond to like Western fine arts. Eliana, I don't know if you can go to the following image. The exhibition had like amazing moments. Here you can see like the work of Sheronawe, Sheronawe Hakiwe, who is probably one of the most well-known, let's say, indigenous Amazonian artists from Venezuela. He's now representing Venezuela in the country's national pavilion in Venice. Then can we go to the following image, Eliana, please? Here, there's also a beautiful moment of the exhibition, because you can find Lastenia Canayo, who is a Peruvian indigenous artist that is working around the spirits of the plants. She is translating, also the cosmogonies around how plants have like certain spirits and characteristics into these beautiful drawings. And she's here in conversation to the right, with Abel Rodriguez. I don't know if you have heard about Abel Rodriguez, but he's an indigenous artist from Colombia. And his paintings are well known for working like new categorizations of the Amazon vegetation, rainforest, and he creates these beautiful connections between like plants and animals in the images that he produced, It's super difficult to see, in fact, these two artists, for example, dialoguing, in a normal exhibition, so as I was telling you, I think the show really had beautiful moments that is also creating like a new, let's say, like a new genealogy, for Amazonian art. In the following image, you can see, for example, a conversation between very well, let's say, established urban, Peruvian artists, Sandra Gamarra, Edi Rose, Nancy La Rosa, Roberto Huarcaya, and I'm just gonna like mention like the names, but not delve into their artworks. And in the following image, you can see, for example, this is also a very interesting dialogue, Remer Yawarkani and Francesco Mariotti. And in the following image, for example, you can see two paintings in Yanchama, which is like a natural leaf, that many indigenous creators use. And one of them is the one in the left, is Elena Valera. And she's depicting a traditional Shipibo Conibo party. And on the other side, there's a Santiago Yawarkani painting, who is that is representing, the enslavement and genocide that was produced during the rubber era in the Amazon. And the other exhibition that I also wanted to highlight in this talk is Indios Anthropófagos, that was also that happened also, in 2019. It's like a project by Christian Bendayan, co-curated by Gustavo Buntings and Juliana Vidarte. And the project was presented at the Peruvian Pavilion, not in this, but in the previous Venice Biennial. I don't know, Eliana, if we can go to the following slide. Let's say that I won't delve as well in the project too much, because it's really, really layered. But I want to quote a little bit one of the most interesting arguments of curator Juliana Vidarte about the artist's practice. Basically, she said that he creates paintings that function as hybrid archives in which reinterpretations of the images of the regional pictorial landscape tradition coexist with representations of the citizens of the city of Iquitos, which was the city where the rubber boom took place, mostly, but especially focusing on the current trans community, and here you can see like this kind of operation, there's like this butterfly, with trans women, or this butterfly that is a trans woman, as representation of the exuberance of the natural world in the Amazon. And behind you have like this landscape, which is like, I think, a copy of one of the views of the Rio Amazonas, but Otto Michael, which was one of the first artists that started to paint, the landscape of the Amazon, the landscape that was transforming itself because of the introduction of modernization due to the big boom that the rubber created. So he creates these kinds of allegories, that are like really have many connotations and many layers. I don't know if we can go to the following image, Eliana. These are some of the images of the show that I took when I went to Venice. And can we go to the following one as well? Yeah, these are I think they give a little bit an idea of the pavilion, massive paintings in relation to this pictorial tradition and what is currently happening in the city of Iquitos, Even though all these efforts have been essential to make visible the importance of the Amazonian cultural production, they have mainly operated in a representational realm. Certainly, it's surprising that artists are rarely addressing the primitive accumulation processes that currently traverse the region and its inhabitants. Moreover, after the tragedy that the COVID has implied for all the Amazonian region, Fertilizing Morning, it's an ongoing artistic research project led by Eliana Otta, that I think seeks to make visible this social problematic that is constantly expelled from the public debate. It's like, and that's something that I was, talking to Eliana about this. I think yesterday that we had a small conversation, and that the worldviews, animistic worldviews of the indigenous communities and the opposition that they represent to the expansion of capitalism, and in that sense to, the development promise, by the state, really makes them dangerous, and makes very difficult, at least locally, to talk about this problematic, even though the Amazonian scene has received a lot of attention, this subject, and specifically, is not something that is being debated in the social, in the public sphere. Sorry, Fertilizing Morning, as you will see soon, that I will give the floor to Eliana, has had disparate public moments and has been hosted and will be hosted by different institutions, functioning almost like a platform that collaborates with diverse communities. Inspired in Llana Achpa, I think it's pronounced in that way, a technique that was devised thousands of years ago by Amazonian communities to guarantee soil regeneration. The project proposes to learn from the peoples like the indigenous peoples who have already survived many endings of their worlds, and therefore may be better equipped for living in a much and more complex planet. Also, I think the project is a good excuse to think, about what the stories are recognized in the social space, what discourses are visible in the public sphere, and how to translate, them to the art world. But I think we can start a more kind of a dialogue with Eliana later. I don't want to say more about her work, and I think it's a good moment after this kind of brief introduction about the subject matter and how has been, let's say, developing in the last 20 years, I think it's a good moment to give the floor to Eliana.
Okay, thank you, Florencia, and thank you, Warren and Sarita, for the invitation. I will start giving briefly a bit of context about how I came to this project, which I am calling Fertilizing Morning. Maybe I would like to make sure that I'm being heard properly. Yeah, Florencia? Okay. Great. I wanted to explain a little bit my interest in the subject of mourning. I think this has been growing in the last years, and especially was part of a profound experience of learning that I had while working as the coordinator for the curatorial team that made up the permanent exhibition at the Lugar de la Memoria Museum of Memory in Peru. And this is a job I did between 2014 and beginning of 2016 when we inaugurated the exhibition that you can see now in that museum. And that was an exhibition about the period of violence that Peru lived between the 80s and 2000s with the insurgent groups and the dictatorship of Fujimori and the different kind of human rights violations that the state was inflicting while fighting the Shining Path. So for this job, among other tasks, I had the task of collecting testimonies and then also recording videos and editing the videos with the people that was in charge of producing the videos for this exhibition. So I think it was out of this work of very intense 2 years traveling in Peru and talking with people that was affected by violence in different ways. I somehow ended up committed to the question of trying to reflect and trying to work through art about the lack of public spaces for mourning, because in connection to Peruvian history, mourning is a very marginalized experience, especially when the lives in question belong to indigenous people and people from the lower classes. So this is also something that for me was very much connected to the question that Judith Butler has been posing about which lives are grievable. And then I was trying to extend this question as much as possible and transforming it into which losses are grievable. So not only thinking about human lives, but also considering loss in an expanded sense. So that's how I ended up moving to Europe in the last years to do a PhD about collective processes of loss connected to the crisis in Greece. And from that interest in the Greek crisis and the possibility of art to create collective processes of mourning, I also expanded this question into losses connected, for example, to the burned forests in the island of Evia last year. This is an image from some rituals that we did with a collective I have with some friends in Athens. And what I can say is that in the process of developing this research for the PhD that has been going on for 4 years now, I'm finishing this research, I had to experience this sense of division in a way, because I started the PhD in 2018, the research about losses connected to the Greek crisis. And I was very interested in working with Greek activists and artists. But then in the middle of this process that was intended to be as collective as possible, the pandemic came. And the pandemic came not only to make me rethink how I was relating to the word crisis, but also to the word mourning and to the understanding of mourning that I think is something that we need to collectively rethink, probably in a planetarian scale, because of the way that the pandemic had made it impossible to actually mourn the deceased people. And this has been very deeply felt in Peru, which is one of the countries with highest amount of dead people. And I was following this at a distance and feeling how my priorities were changing, especially when noticing, as Florencia was commenting, the violent, the cruel way in which the pandemic was affecting the Amazonian area, and the quick loss of masters, leaders, and people with embodied knowledges that are definitely irreplaceable in their contexts. And this was, for me, added to a process in which I was already following at the distance the killing of indigenous leaders that have been happening in Peru, in general in Latin America, and mainly in Brazil, Colombia, Peru, well, Mexico, etc., almost everywhere, in the places in which there are conflicts regarding extractive industries and drug trafficking. So, by example, this is an image of a small performance I did in the beginning of 2020 when I spent some time in Lima, and I made a small ritual as a farewell to certain leaders that were assassinated in that time. So somehow the pandemic forced me to look again into human loss and to evaluate my priorities and my degree of identification with the reality in Europe and in Athens, and in general with places where the struggles about life and death were not a daily basis problem. So that's how I decided to focus more and more in this project that now I'm calling Fertilizing Mourning, which is a merging of different kind of knowledges, epistemologies, authors as well that have been with me in the last years, as I mentioned before, Judith Butler, and at the same time I'm very interested in Athina Athanasiou, talking about agonistic mourning and the revolutionary potential of loss, Stefano Varese, who Florencia recently mentioned, and the idea of cosmocentric as the way he describes the indigenous understanding of the world in opposition to anthropocentric, but as something that doesn't have one center connected to the human, but is something that completely decentralized in the cosmos. What Jean Ray calls critical mourning, connected also to a critique to modernism and with his claim to ground ourselves more deeply with our attachments to living beings in the planet. And then also thinking about Latin American authors like Gloria Anzaldúa and Jose Maria Arguedas, who have been, I think, pioneers in trying to highlight the revolutionary potential of making depression public and of understanding the revolutionary forces of feelings that sometimes are connected to negative feelings, but that can like pain or grief, by example, that normally are relegated because, by example, in Peru, we always hear this narrative of not looking at the past, not opening old wounds, but that we need to move on and look towards progress and future and all of that. So these kind of readings that I have been dedicated to in the last years, I started to try to combine them with indigenous practices and knowledges that I have been researching, like this practice called Llana Alpa, which is very well described in this book that exists in English and in Spanish. In English is named Sacred Soil, published by Robert and Frederick Mengling. And Frederick, she has a center in Peru where she has been working with this technique with indigenous from the Quechua Lama area, and where she's trying to combine precisely scientific knowledge with traditional knowledge from the area. So the idea of Llana Alpa is that it is a practice that has been used for thousands of years in the Amazon. Diverse archaeological findings have proved already, in which when somebody would die, people would bury the rests of this person next to pieces of broken ceramics that the person made when this person was alive. And then they would bury this also next to what we would call compost nowadays, next to rests of fruits and vegetables, and also next to fermented feces, because the indigenous peoples from the Amazon didn't have domestic animals such as cows or horses, let's say. So they would ferment their own feces to regenerate the soil, and they would mix all of these together, cover it, and burn it, preventing the oxygen to come to the atmosphere. So in that way, all of these would go towards the soil, regenerating it. So this is very close to what nowadays is called biochar, but in the Amazonian area, it had to do with a ritual approach to the spirits of the orchard. It had the spirit of an offering, and there was no distinction between the organic matter from the human bodies, from the feces, from the ceramics, from vegetables. So everything was merged, and it was given to the soil as an offering that would regenerate the soil itself. So now we know that this traditional romantic idea of the Amazon just being some kind of forgotten virgin paradise is precisely an exoticized construction of modernity. And then on the contrary, the Amazon is what it is because of thousands of years of common work between the humans that have been inhabiting it and what we call nature in the area. So what I am calling fertilizing morning is a concept in the make that I am offering as an invitation to others to play with it, to create from it, and to try to think together the kind of mourning that we consider necessary for the contemporary experiences of loss. So now I'm going to read a couple of fragments from a manifesto that I wrote, and which is called Fertilizing Mourning as a Global South Offering to a World on Flames. The current civilizational crisis, a multidimensional crisis of the colonial modern pattern, which destroys the conditions needed for the production and reproduction of life in the planet, asks us to transform our alliances, to reconcile and mix what we conceived as opposed. COVID-19 asks from us to rethink life and death, loss and future, wound and struggle. Mourning as a fertilizing practice shall learn from the Llana Alpa, from the only civilization that steadily improved its lands, since the richness of what it offered to its soil equated what it took from it. Mourning as a fertilizing practice calls on us to engage with our bodies, corporeal fluids and soil, to create partnerships between our dead and the seeds growing among them. It is never late to mourn the loss of a life, human or animal, a forest or a river, an idea or a dream. It is never late because their lack erodes the thick webs in which animals, dreams, forests, ideas, rivers, humans exist and existed. Nothing disappears without touching something or someone in the way out. not even the 6 million people who died without saying goodbye to their beloved ones. We breathe the dense air around their beds now, with or without masks. Someday we feel it and feel suddenly heavier, dizzier, or just skeptical of everybody's attempts to reach normality. So another part of the manifesto goes like this. Fertilizing mourning is an urgent collective task for the global South's disappearing forms of life and worlds, an invitation to imagine, create, and practice what it could be for those willing to contaminate politics with spirituality, for those who envision a revolutionary politics ready to defend what is still considered sacred in the world, even though such consideration is violently marginalized. Because for those who die today defending rivers, mountains, fruits, and the air their grandparents inhaled, there is no doubt that we inhabit sacred worlds, and it has been by naming and defending their homes as sacred that they saved them until now. Always denouncing the loss of a species, a forest, or a lake when extractive forces took control. Always marrying mourning with resistance, survival with life-affirming struggles and celebrations. So this project has different iterations and moments, and then this manifesto is one expression of it. Then last year I made in Berlin, in the context of a big platform for projects that are focused on eco-social renewal, which is called Driving the Human. I made this guided meditation, which is called a flying kiss thrown to the air. And the idea is that it is a guided meditation in which I transmit to the participants some tasks, responsibilities, lessons that were given to me by a plant. And the little images that you see there printed on the floor are some stills from the videos I am working for another dimension of the project, which so far is the more important one, and which is called Virtual Sanctuary for Fertilizing Mourning. So this is a project of a website that is being made right now, and it's going to be probably ready now in October this year. And it's a website which is going to contain stories of 4 communities in Peru where indigenous leaders have been in the recent years. So I was there at the beginning of this year, and I'm going now again in a month. And I have been working in collaboration with the communities Nuevo Amanecer Hawaii, Unipacuyacu, Sinchiroca, and Puerto Nuevo. And the people has been very eager to show their lands, to show the territories that they are trying to protect, and also to share the stories of their killed leaders and members of communities. And for me, the idea of this website is that it can merge the act of remembering and mourning with also learning and getting to know these areas and the ways of living that are also threatened. So it is a merging of different threatened worlds of the people that lives there, all kind of creatures and spirits and beings that inhabit the area together. So the website hopes to give some hints in those directions. And here you can see some images from these videos that I have made with a 360 camera attached to my head. So I was walking, camping, living with the people from the communities for some days. And the user of the website is going to have the experience of my bodily engagement with the context. And we're also going to hear the people sharing their knowledges about their languages, their territories, and the way they defend it. So well, there you can see me with this camera on the head. And maybe if something was not so clear, Florencia can help me later on to clarify or to expand on something that is missing. But for now, I would like to share a brief fragment of a video that can give you an idea of the kind of content that you will find on this website.
Maria, que tá aí? Ai, pipoca ali. Ah, cabeça, tá aqui. Paviche. Paviche.
Gracias.
Ahí está bien. Gracias, por un rato. Ya, ¿no?
¿Sabe por qué le llamaban Charile?
¿Por qué?
Porque se dice al final, Mauro Pío, este era antes nuestro camino. Ah, está adentro. Allá está sentado. Ahora puede machetear allá. Mira. Ya, piedra. A piedra nosotros le decimos mapi.
Hola.
Este es su camino. Venían de allá, por ejemplo, de Atalaya, venía la una pasada, en tenis, para allá a Palomar. De Palomar se dirigían para Tenac.
Buenos días. Eso es lo que es increíble cuando uno camina por acá, es pensar que alguien quiere destruir el bosque, ¿no?
Sí. Por ejemplo, el que está enseñando este tincana es bueno para los riñones.
Ah, sí.
Es el medio. Comes en caldo, te cura los riñones. Todos estos bosques estaban diseñados ya para ser destruidos con la empresa maderera.
Sí.
Con los invasores.
Y ellos luego han retrocedido.
Han retrocedido, han dejado desde el momento que hemos empezado a atender.
Tetri.
¿Cómo está, Quemena? No te invoques en comunidad.
Ay, gracias, gracias.
De ese cerro para atrás, ahí era la comunidad. Ahí hemos tenido fuerte enfrentamiento con los invasores. Años atrás venimos sufriendo ya. Primero sendero luminoso, concesionario, narcotraficante, terrorista. Ese es nuestro café que siempre hemos sembrado.
Buenos días. Hola, hermanita.
¿Así cómo se llama? Ah, ya.
Y grabar como envuelven cada chamba. Buenos días, Kitaitri.
Bienvenida, hermanita.
Gracias.
Como un cuy grande.
So I think I can stop sharing my screen and maybe we can discuss a bit with Florencia and I guess with whoever wants to say something, and maybe it would be also good to know from Sarita or somebody how much time do we have, because yeah, I don't know if we are strict now with time.
I think the talk was 1 hour and a half. Sarita, I don't know if I'm right. In any case, I think we have at least more, like 10 minutes more to discuss. And probably I could start, Eliana. We were discussing the other day about Fertilizing Morning, this like ongoing research and artistic project that has like heterogeneous outcomes depending on different collaborations as well, no? And we were talking specifically about the website, which you are working on at the moment. And we were also like discussing which video to share with in this talk, no? And there were videos that were much more frontal, you know, about the situation of violence, you know, in which these communities are immersed. And we finally decide to show this video that is called "This Community Exists," no? Because we thought that, as Elena said, that her presence, her like embodied experience was very well transmitted, no? In the video. However, like in the other videos you have also recorded, you know, there's like a much explicit testimony about the situation that these communities that you are working with live on a daily basis, no? And I wanted to ask you, in first place, how this idea of the virtual tour, of immersing yourself, you know, taking yourself, your body, you know, and having you as a mediator of the experience between the community and, let's say, the public, which is a public from the art world, you know, came to be, no? This is my first question, no? That has to do more with the project outcome and its form.
Yes. So, well, this project is definitely influenced by the pandemic in many levels, as I was mentioning at the beginning, by the conceptual and ethical change of the dimensions of mourning, I think, right now. And then I was also interested in how, through the pandemic, all this idea of virtual tours started to appear on different websites, and especially the first year of the pandemic, it became very popular for people I don't know how much actually people were using it, but at least it was very much offered, like virtual tours in museums or in natural parks. And what I found interesting is that the virtual tours that were connected to experiences about what we call nature is that these natural parks are basically places where people were expelled from with excuse of taking care of nature. So basically they prevent people from actually engaging with the place in order to preserve some kind of pristine paradise that is untouched by the humans, which doesn't correspond to reality and how people has been living for thousands of years in connection to what we call nature. So I was curious about how it would work if I would work with the idea of virtual tours, but in connection to places where people actually live and engage in a deep way with what is called nature. And also I forgot to mention that in this website, because what we saw now is like a video edited to be seen like a normal video, but in the website all the videos are 360, so that people can choose like how to look at them. And also there is going to be an applicative for people to download if somebody has this Oculus, so they can actually see it as an immersive experience. And I was very doubtful of using these kind of devices because I have always been very lo-fi myself. But at the same time, I thought that a lot of these places are actually changing and disappearing faster than we can not only do something about it, but also actually get to know them. So then maybe it is worth having some kind of documentation of how these places are right now. Because, for example, the last few years, the amount of fires in the Amazon, well, not only in the Amazon, in Greece or Australia or California or many places have disappeared huge amount of forests and animals and or kind of creatures. So then I thought it was maybe interesting to work in this way. But yeah, for me, it's also an experiment.
Thank you both. I also want to make sure and invite people to ask questions, to raise your hand, or to even type them. But really quickly, if you answered this, I'm sorry, but is there a place to read the rest of your manifesto? Will it be on the website or some other place? I might have missed that, I'm sorry, but.
No, I didn't say it. For now, it exists in the written dissertation for my thesis that I'm defending towards the end of the year, but it's probably going to be published by a Greek magazine. So now it is in this process. If it gets published, I will share it with everybody and you, of course.
That's awesome. It was really, really amazing. Molly?
Thank you.
Hi, wow, I loved your presentations, both of you, and the text that you shared. And my question has to do, I've been also interested in the sort of synesthetic kind of way of being that is a way of engaging with the world, you know what I mean? And that I think Stefano Varese spoke about. And I'm really intrigued by the way that, I'm wondering if you find that the 3D technology is a way of engaging that synesthetic way of being that I think connects us, you know? Anyway, yeah, that's my question.
Thank you for the question. I hadn't thought about it in that way. I think now it is a beautiful homework to try to engage with the question after the talk. What I can say is that I thought of the 3D because of the experience when you are in the rainforest. It's like there is so much information and it's so layered, and wherever you look there is something to look at and to feel, and it's like life and death are totally merged and working together, because we can see tons of beings and plants growing out of a dead tree, and at the same time, it is full of information for the senses as well. So it has a lot to do with smell and touch and the temperature and humidity or all of that. So yeah, I think this synesthetic understanding that you are proposing is very accurate. And it also has to do with something that we have been discussing with Florencia, and that for me is at the core of the project of trying to defy binarisms. and the way in which we as modern subjectivities have been formed, by example, to have at the core of our civilization this division between nature and culture, between human and animal, and from that, with everything we can think, and just creating these hierarchies and oppositions between things. So I think what you are saying goes directly into this, how to defy these binarisms and these oppositions, and think about coexistence and about fluidity and the impossibility of dividing clearly what is what, and where something begins and ends, which I think is something that for the people that has some interest in the Amazon is a very present experience. Yeah, I don't know, Florencia, if you want to add something about that.
Yes, no, probably say that when I first got to know Eliana's project, and also like when she shared with me like the articles, like the Berardi articles, for example, I was amazed because of, or due to the kind of epistemological shift that it meant for me to understand the Amazon not like a virgin territory, but a territory that was jointly made by humans and not humans during thousands of millennia, of centuries, or thousands of years, sorry. Something that is very interesting is that, for example, the Llana Alpa, which I think in Quechua is pronounced Llana Achpa, this soil regeneration technique has proof that what Orellana, who was the first person that went down the Rio Amazonas, the Amazonas River, said it was probably true. And is that the Amazon was really populated by a lot of people, but apparently, the colonial invasion was so violent, that the Amerindians saw lost 90% of their population, So the Amazon has not been a virgin territory. On the contrary, it has been a territory that has been nurtured and taken care of by humans in a very kind of deep complicity and understanding of reciprocity, and the current indigenous communities, are or have inherited, all these traditions, even though they are exposed to immense levels of violence, not only from the state, as I try to summarize and explain, and then we can think, for example, as a character as Bolsonaro, who has had a super aggressive politics towards the Amazon and indigenous people, even he in the city he was negating, in the urban center, Sao Paulo, Rio, though he was negating the existence of the virus, he was not even using any kind of protection himself, until he got the COVID, so he basically let die a huge amount of people in the Amazon, and this, it was also, as I was telling you, many people say it was a strategy, it was a case of necropolitics, clearly. But these entanglements between humans and not humans or more than humans, this living entity that the Amazon is, is what has, I think is the conceptual basis of one of the conceptual bases of Eliana's project. And I think it's very, very important to show this, to make it public, because from the artwork, there's a big idealization about indigenous communities, indigenous peoples. There's also a market fetishization of their material culture, but there's really little about what we know about their daily practices and their daily and current conditions, life conditions, And I think that Eliana's project is in some way like rehearsing, how to talk about these subjects that traverse us and are of of planetary importance into the art world.
Thank you. I just want to fit in one quick question and then we can wrap it up from the live audience, from Christina. Eliana, why do you choose to film the video while you're wearing the camera on your head? How might this be related to embodied forms of knowledge? Oh, and we do maybe have one other question if you have time, if that's okay.
Yes. Yeah, as I was saying, I never had a close relationship to technology. And also my engagement with video art has always been basically self-taught and always responding to a specific context, a specific idea that was raised because of a specific context. What I have been doing in the last year sometimes was attaching a small GoPro to my camera. So I was interested in having like the perspective of the hand somehow and transmitting the hapticity of the relationship between the touch and basically or mostly stones, rocks, that I have also been working about that. So then I was wondering how to, even though also in my life I was always thinking that you actually go to a place to get an idea of the actual place. But I think it's also in connection to the pandemic and the impossibility of traveling so much, but then also thinking about the ecologies and the politics of traveling. I thought that it could be interesting to offer to the viewer my own embodied experience of the place, and so that the camera would never be something that would be the situation, like reporting from the outside, that immersed in the shared experience of learning about the territory, because mostly what the camera shows is how the people from these places are either showing me their lands or explaining me something, because it's mostly me learning from them about the place. So I wanted that experience of learning and encountering a place to be transmitted as more faithfully as possible somehow. And yes, I think that at the core of it is this interest about embodied knowledge and try to defy the trust in what rationality and logics can do.
Thank you. Ash, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. There's time for a couple more questions, right? Or I don't want to be the last one.
We can fit in a couple more if it's okay with Florencia and Eliana.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really great. Also, Eliana, it's really nice to see you again since like 2017. Yeah. But yeah, thank you for that. That was really great. I had a question about the relationship between hospitality and mourning, and also kind of the temporality of mourning. And I mean that in the sense of like, when you're there with the camera, they're hosting you, but they're also hosting all of everyone who watches it, you know, and like we become embodied in your presence as a guest, and then we kind of become a guest. And there's something like disembodied about the relationship between the audience and the guest. And that was something that I thought was interesting, and would like to know what your thoughts are on that. And also like the temporality of mourning. And I mean that in the sense that like, on one hand, their relationship to the audience as guest is somewhat like anticipatory, like because you're there with the camera and they don't see an audience, but they anticipate that like in the future, there is going to be a different guest. But then also when you were saying that it's based on like, yeah, the community exists and like kind of thinking about before its disappearance, you're kind of also like anticipating a certain type of disappearance. And so I was just thinking about, yeah, the role of anticipation in relation to mourning, which is normally like a past-oriented thing. And so if you have any thoughts on either hospitality or the anticipatory mourning, that would be interesting. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. I think, yeah, this question would deserve a very long conversation. And also, I'm very influenced by the experience of having been living in Greece in the last years, because I think, well, this is a place in which collective rites of mourning are still very alive, and they are also very connected to the idea of hospitality, because big part of the cultural life in Greece evolves around hospitality and about hosting and sharing. And I think in these kind of communities, in many times it also is like that, but it's difficult to generalize because I'm working with four, and they're very different among each other, and not only because of the kind of problems that they face, because it's very different to be surrounded by the production of cocaine and drug trafficking, which entails a different kind of violence, and the violence connected to wood felling and land trafficking, the example. But also they belong to different ethnicities, and there are also different cultural approaches to death and to mourning. So in the case of the community that you saw in the video, this is a community that they are very extremely aware of their capacity to somehow perform themselves as indigenous community. So actually what you saw is a stage of a welcoming that they wanted me to do. So in this image that you saw of a man next to a blackboard, they were proposing a schedule for us to do together. That was the first part was welcoming the visits, then the next part was walking the territory, then visiting the houses, and then visiting sacred places. So they proposed this agenda to me, and I followed exactly what they proposed, even doing this reenactment of me going out with this camera on and then going inside and recording how each person was approaching to say hi to me. But we had already met. We had already an assembly in which they were proposing all of these, and then they went and they hid everywhere, and they wanted to come from different places. And of course, I did what they suggest, because this is a very specific case of they having a clear idea. But this is also very connected to them honoring the memory of the deceased leader, because actually the daughter of this killed leader, Beatriz, she told me that before our arrival, I traveled with a partner. She dreamt with her father that actually was murdered like 9 years ago. So it's a long time, but she still dreams about him very often. And he told her in her dream that she should receive us, that everybody should receive us and welcome us like he used to do. So when they talk about him, they always stress this capacity of him of making feel people welcome, and of wanting to show the community and what they know and what they dream for it. So in this particular case, it is very connected, this issue of hospitality and mourning. In the other cases, it's different, but by example, in the other cases, two of these communities, they are Cacataibo, so their costume is that they bury their deceased ones in the ground of their, what would be their living room. So then there is something to think about hospitality as well, because they were receiving us in their houses and saying like, yes, here is my husband, or here is my son. And we were actually stepping on the ground where the body was buried. So there would be a lot to, I guess, think and talk about that. Yes, so thank you for bringing that up, and nice to see you.
Yanni, would you like to ask a question or have a comment?
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciated both you, Eliana, and Florencia's contribution here. It was amazing. I think you sort of answered the question a little bit based on what Ash talked, but I was thinking about ethical, ethnographic practices and working with communities. And I feel like you sort of mentioned just listening to them and taking their lead, and also the community having this sort of dream practice of accepting you and knowing that this was going to happen. So I feel like that was already answered, but if you want to answer that again, that's one question. And then the other question I had was about the exhibition. And Florencia mentioned this, sort of the marketing or the fetishization of indigenous cultures. And I was wondering how you folks held that tension within the exhibition making. And then also I was just curious about how maybe the indigenous folks from these communities, how they responded to the exhibition, and then what happened to the works after. Yeah, so those are my like 2 questions. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jenny. I will respond briefly so I can give the floor to Florencia. I just wanted to say that for me, this is a process. I have a lot of also questions myself, and I try to engage with them depending on each situation and each contextual, because I was saying these communities are very different, and mainly I try to listen. And I am also very aware of how there are different agendas within the communities. And on one hand, there is no naivety at all, because these particular communities, they struggle with these deep conflicts all the time. So the amount of really violent, traumatic events that they have already faced and that they face, I think makes them be extremely aware of all the complicities of receiving any kind of foreigner or external agent. And they also try to see what kind of advantage that can provide. So in one community, they want to have eventually a plant to process their coffee. So probably they also receive me because they hope that people that see these videos will then say, oh, I would like to donate some money for them to be able to process their coffee or whatever. So yes, each of these cases brings different questions. So this is also like a question that could be very, very long, but thank you. So I will now pass the floor to Florencia.
Thanks, Eliana. About that, I would also add that indigenous communities are like conscious about the Western environmental rhetorics. And even though it's a language that is foreign initially for them, because, for example, they defend the forest, the land, the rivers, because they consider them as living entities. But this, of course, is difficult to translate, into, for the state, for example, So, like increasingly, these communities are also translating like these vital projects or cosmogonies into the Western environmental rhetorics. And you have many cases of these kinds of collaboration throughout the region, So that's a specific phenomenon that is really interesting and new. And about the fetishization of indigenous material culture, that's something that is indeed happening. In the case of this exhibition, Amazonias, which is an exhibition that I really appreciate, because it was creating this kind of Pan-Amazonian dialogues between these different indigenous artists and had like really beautiful moments. Finally, the exhibition created, like, say, different reactions, confronting reactions from like the indigenous artists, because even though, let's remember that this exhibition happened in the context of ARCO 2019, in which Peru was the invited country, to be in the art fair, with a let's say almost massive number of Peruvian artists in the art fair and galleries, but also, taking different cultural institutions. And something that the indigenous artists noticed is that they were included, for example, in these exhibitions, in Amazonias, for example, in Matadero, Madrid, which is a very well-known cultural art center in Madrid, but they were not included at all in the art fair. So even though their work was, taken to this exhibition, like it is still not included in the market. So the market still preserves, like this division between folk art and fine arts, and this was really uncomfortable for them. So there were some like public lectures, in which some indigenous artists, I think it was Rembrandt Yawarkani, if I'm right, that publicly said, okay, something weird is happening here,
why are we included in the exhibition, but we are not presenting it fair, you know? And as indigenous creators, we also want to sell our work, you know, to be part of a market that consider us artists, no, like an equal level than that the artists that we are sharing the space in Amazonias, no. So that was like really interesting, and of course, as I was saying before, some indigenous artist practices are starting to be considered like in the international global art world, you know, and I mean Sheronawi, for example, the Venezuelan artist that now is representing Venezuela in the National Pavilion, or thinking about Abel Rodriguez, he was in Documenta, you know, and this is just our, like, or Santiago Yahuarcani, whose work around the Ruber era has been like recently bought by the Museum Reina Sofia, you know. It's a question mark still, you know, how these practices will be like incorporated, and then how they will be shown, you know, within like a kind of Western-centered institutions, no? And how can they also subvert like the traditional stories or art histories, you know, that are told from these institutions, you know. But there's still a lot of discussion that should take place regarding this kind of new global tendency, no, to include indigenous creators and indigenous art, no. In any case, I think it should be always include giving a lot of context, no, and trying to avoid, you know, this fetishization only of the object, no, without considering the practice and the cosmologies and the people who are behind these objects, no. So it needs a lot of respect and contextualization, historical contextualization, to be understood, no.
Great, thank you. I think we should probably wrap it up there, because we also need some space between our next seminar. But thank you so much for this amazing talk. I'm so glad that we were able to work everything out to be together this morning. So thank you for your time. Thanks to everybody for joining as well online and also here. Tomorrow will be our last public lecture tomorrow morning with Nicolas Bourriaud. And for those of you in person, we'll have our next seminar this afternoon with Reza Nicolastani. So thank you all, and see you later or see you tomorrow. Thanks, Florencia.
Thank you. Bye.
Sorry for the chaotic beginning. Thank you, everybody.